Hi, I'm here with Loren Stuckenbruck, and we are going to talk about Ethiopic traditions, religious traditions, and the Book of the Watchers. So, thank you for talking to me.
Thank you.
Can you tell me a little bit about your trips to Ethiopia and what are the purposes of your travels and research there?
The initial reason for going to Ethiopia was to get more manuscripts for the Book of Enoch, which is found in fragments in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in Aramaic, and also larger Greek fragments and smaller fragments of other languages, but is only completely preserved in Ethiopic. With an assistant, Ted Erho, we have been able to identify, locate, and to some degree even find manuscripts unknown in the West or hidden in libraries in Europe that provide us some of the oldest complete manuscript evidence that we have for this book.
So, can you tell me, just in case people don't know, why is this book interesting for the Book of Enoch? Why is it interesting both just for broader scholarship about the Noah's flood story, primordial history, but also if you could also speak a little bit to why it's important in Ethiopian culture?
It's a very big question.
Yeah.
The importance of 1 Enoch was recognized by R.H. Charles in 1912, just a little over 100 years ago, who claimed that outside the Hebrew Bible, this book, inasmuch as it is a book, is the single most important work to influence early Christianity and early Christian thinking. So the fact that it is only considered sacred scripture in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition makes it very interesting to explore what that tradition does with this book in trying to interpret contemporary culture and the place of Ethiopian Christian tradition within the larger globalizing world. Noah tradition has always been recognized as an important part of Enoch. In some places of 1 Enoch, Noah is even speaking in the first person.
Which doesn't happen in Genesis.
It does not happen in Genesis at all, and yet it does happen in a couple of places in the Book of Parables. 1 Enoch is actually not simply one book. It was probably 20 different authors whose writings were collected over a period of 400 years. Well, we don't know when it was collected, but they were written over a period of 400 years and then are only found in the Ethiopian tradition. Noah was very important as a figure because here was a righteous person who survived the biggest global cataclysm that ever was in myth or history. And he is a picture of a person who is counter to all expressions of evil that were thought to be taking place in that day, whether it was other people, as the Genesis text emphasizes, or whether it was forces that are demonic or are like demonic, as emphasized in the Book of Watchers. God rescues him and his 3 sons and so forth, but does not rescue these demonic forces. And so the contrast couldn't be greater. The significance of the flood out of the Enochic tradition then is that this is the time when God definitively defeats evil in a way that anticipates the final outcome of what will happen to evil in the end of time. This is a past act that guarantees the future, so that people living in the time in which the Book of Watchers was written could be confident that the evils that they knew, faced both as communities and as individuals, were but defeated powers that could be managed in anticipation of this ultimate destruction that will take place. So the Noah story was typological. It was inspiring. It was something that did something for later generations of people who were reading about this stuff. They saw themselves in the shadow or in the wake of these events and able to play out as actors things that were inaugurated during the time of Noah in anticipation of evil's final removal from the real world.
So, can you say, you made the distinction, in Genesis it's evil people, and in the Book of the Watchers, as many people know and are fascinated by, you have monsters and demons and an enumeration of evil that is much more attention to cultural sorts of phenomenon and threats that people might, like specific threats that people might feel like war weapons or makeup. Can you say more about that evil and what is, and maybe even connecting, because you mentioned that that the Christian religious traditions in Ethiopia today use these texts to understand their contemporary lives. So maybe make that connection.
There is a disjuncture, to be honest, between what we can say about the meaning, the function, and use and reception of the Enoch tradition in the Second Temple period and how it is actually being appropriated today. I think there is a struggle today to know what to do with Enoch in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition. For the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, the main value of Enoch is that here we have a writing composed before the time of the flood in Ge'ez, the classical Ethiopic language, which actually predicts Jesus. So Enoch is the earliest prophet amongst all of the other prophets to predict that Jesus would come. This is seen in the book of parables and so forth. But if we start talking about the defeat of evil in the past and so forth, in the Ethiopian context, one gets blank stares from the people. However, they're very intrigued with such reading possibilities of this literature, and I think they are in a good position to receive it and to think about it critically in relation to their very stressful and tense political, socio-religious context today.
Do you have ready at hand maybe an example of interesting readings that you've seen of the ways that the Enochic primordial history has been helpful or fruitful in thinking about contemporary issues?
That's very interesting. It's hard to find concrete written.
Okay. But in conversations
But in conversations, yes. One is the resistance of culture from a dominant force. As you had mentioned earlier, we have the introduction by rebellious angels of beautification techniques, weaponry, jewelry, instruments of violence, so-called magic, and other things that are considered foreign. And to that extent, there are people reading this text in a way that see in Enoch a pattern or a model for resisting a dominant culture. In this case, it could be either the West, which had come in and had threatened the country with colonial domination, or on a smaller scale level, the government itself, which is, though a minority from the northeast of Ethiopia, nevertheless outweighs is disproportionately powerful over a large segment of people. And there's a great deal of anxiety about this. And Enoch provides some model for it. We do not find this written in any traditions. But this is an unknown territory. There is an Andemta that has not been translated into English. It only exists in Amharic, which gathers together oral traditions that try to summarize how Enoch has been interpreted during the last several hundred years. And we have an initial publication of this in the Journal for the Study of the Pseudepigrapha by Ralph Lee of chapters 6 through 11 forthcoming, which will be our first access to this in the English language.
And maybe I could just ask one last question that's somewhat personal. You've mentioned in conversation with me today and yesterday that visiting Ethiopia has been personally transformational.
Yes.
That it's made a huge difference in maybe the way you see things, maybe the way you understand your field, perhaps even more broadly in ways that I don't know. But could you speak to that a little bit? What has it been? What has it meant to be, first of all, interested in the Book of Enoch in an academic way, but then going to Ethiopia and starting to work with manuscripts and meet people and look at the culture and etc.?
Yes. I think that what I see in the tradition for myself is that Enoch provides a window into a way of looking at the world that allows me to have hope that, to a small degree at least, some of the problems that I or anyone faces can be managed to some degree without harboring the illusion that they're going to disappear. That for me is a very important thing. When I go to Ethiopia, I see some of this at work. Maybe I'm projecting on that culture, something I'd like to find. On the other hand, this is something I do see. I wonder how, given the terrible poverty or the domination of the economy by the Chinese and all these other problems, I wonder how they manage just to keep going. And I wonder about the degree to which Enoch can enter the conversation, if not already, as people reflect on the situation of Ethiopia at the moment, which is enormously complex, but provides numerous opportunities of thinking about tradition that is actually very remote from the way we do so in the West.
Well, thank you very much.
Good.